Hello and welcome to this very important program on redistricting. This is an issue that is going to be on the ballot, Proposal 2 in Michigan in November. So we want to teach you all that we know about Proposal 2. I'm your host, Kathy Dolan, and today I'm joined by Eileen Grew and Peter Anders. Both are volunteers with Voters Not Politicians, which is a grassroots and nonpartisan group. So Eileen and Peter, thank you so much for being with us
I'm
today.
glad to be here.
Happy to be
Yeah.
here.
Eileen, let's start by just talking about what is redistricting.
Every 10 years, the U.S. Census is done, and after that time, due to population shifts, the legislative districts have to be redrawn in Michigan. The last one was done in 2010. The next one will be done in 2020.
Okay. And what is wrong with the way that Michigan is now redistricted?
The current process has state legislators of the majority party drawing the lines for the districts for the next 10 years. And they are drawing them to favor their own party and keep their party in control, which means if they are termed out with 8 years, someone from their party can take their seat, which is called a safe seat, and that means they will always get reelected because of the way they draw the lines. It's called gerrymandering.
And Peter, why is this called gerrymandering?
It's one of my favorite stories. Actually, it's named after Elbridge Gerry. His name is Gerry. Last name is pronounced Gary, and he was the governor of Massachusetts in 1812. And at that point in time, his state legislature put on him a districting map for the state of Massachusetts that had some really strange shapes on it. And it was effectively a map that was intended, as Eileen said, to favor the politicians that were in power at the time. And Gary, who happened to be a member of the Democratic Republican Party, decided that although he had some misgivings about it, he decided to pass it anyway. And so if you're ever going to make a bad decision, don't do it in public, because your name is going to get strung on in the name of gerrymandering or gosh knows what, because the shape of this particular district that the Boston Gazette had published in a sort of cartoon format was like a salamander. And so they put Gary's name in front of the word salamander, and they got gerrymander, and over the past 200 years or so that it's been in use, it's kind of slurred down to being gerrymander. Yeah.
You have a graphic that you were going to show us.
Yeah, I do. I want to
right?
tell you just how this is done. It's pretty interesting. There will be two maps coming up briefly to compare a gerrymandered district versus a regular district.
Okay.
And if you take a look at the image on the left and on the right, there's a distribution of orange in there and a distribution of green. They're both identical in terms of that pattern. But if you imagine yourself living in a square state with that kind of distribution, you could divide it up fairly into 4 quadrants, like you see on the left, and you'll give both party an advantage. Maybe two of those districts will have a favor of green, and then 2 will have a majority of orange. So that kind of balances out. That's kind of a fair way to look at it. But if you want to do it sneakily, what you can do is you can divide it up the way you see it on the right. Let's say you're in the orange party. Now, if the opposition to orange, the green party, decides to, they can use the census data that Eileen had mentioned and cut up that map in a certain way so you can still have 4 districts shown, but all of the orange is packed into 1 district, okay? That leaves a majority of green in all of the rest of the other 3 districts, and you can see the tally down at the bottom gives advantage of 3 to the 1 of orange. So it's unfair, it's sneaky, and it leads to some weird geometry. I mean, we can take a look at what's going on down in Detroit right now.
Sure.
The next slide shows that.
Yeah, it's good to see an actual graph of what the districts are looking like there.
Yeah. Well, if you can take a look at this, look at that, the purple district. That's district number 14 down in Detroit. That is just crazy. I mean, I'm an architect, and I look at that shape, and I'm thinking, how in the world did they come up with that shape? You can see down the left-hand side of the purple there, you've got a tiny little pink thing that's kind of creeping in from another district. I mean, that's just nuts. Well, the reason for that is because the politicians that were in place at the time of the last census, 2010, divided it up to favor themselves, and you wind up with this weird stretched out shape, and it's helped by the technology. Right now, it's much, much better than the 200 years ago when Gary was doing his work. Now you have computers that can pinpoint exactly where the voters are that you want to have on your side, or you want to exclude the ones that you don't want. That's the essence of gerrymandering, allowing the politician to choose their voters and not the voters choosing the politicians.
I see. Makes sense. So, Elaine, what is voters, not politicians?
It's a remarkable story, Kathy. A young woman in her mid-20s living near Grand Rapids sent out a Facebook question saying, "Who hates gerrymandering?" The response was so large that they realized they were onto something, and it was the beginning of a grassroots, all-volunteer group who wanted to do something about it. What they did was the core group that Katie Fahey started put on 33 town hall meetings in 33 days throughout the whole state of Michigan, and they went directly to the public and said, "What do you want as a solution?" And their solution was to have a citizens commission draw those lines and take it out of the politicians' hands, the foxes that were guarding the hen house. And the public came up with lots of safeguards, good ideas, because the public wanted something they thought would be fair, impartial, and transparent.
Sure.
Because the current system is done behind closed doors with no input from the public, and we're stuck with it.
Sure.
So out of that group, that core group that started, they got some extra help from consultants and things to know, how do you do a petition in Michigan so that we can create a state of Michigan amendment. And over 3,000 volunteers within 4 months gathered over 425,000 signatures, and that is what puts us on the ballot. We have had a couple court challenges to it, and yes, we are constitutional.
Thank goodness.
Yes. But it's just remarkable that all volunteers did this, and it was grassroots and nothing professional.
Strong
All the way.
movement.
All the
Yeah.
way.
Yes.
What is voters, not politicians solution as proposed in this proposal too?
Well, actually, the solution's pretty simple. What Voters Not Politicians has created is the amendment would actually create a commission of citizens, you might say. It constitutes 13 people, 13 commissioners, and there'll be 4 Republicans, or 4 of the majority party, I should say, 4 of the minority party, in this case the Democrats, and then 5 of people that are unaffiliated with either party. So that adds up to 13, and it's an odd number, so in case of ties you can work things through. The intention of that commission is to be fair and impartial and transparent. On our team we call it FIT, like fitting a glove over a mitten. F stands for fair, that the district maps that result from it won't favor one party or the other. It's impartial because of the constitution of this commission, which is made up of a balance of Republicans and Democrats and independents, so there's no bias in that. And then transparent, which is probably one of the most important parts of this amendment. It won't show up in the language on the ballot itself, but if you read the entire text of the amendment, it says that anything that happens on the commission or in the creation of that commission, the actions of the commission and the results of the commission are subject to public review. And built into the process of approval for this, let's call it redistricting, there are actually several public meetings, town hall type sessions, that are incorporated into developing those plans to find out what the communities really want in terms of their own districts and their representation. and also follow-up after the lines are drawn to get feedback from the members of the voters and the Michiganders, you might say, to the lines, how they're drawn, what objections might be raised. And all of this information, not just the meetings, but all the data, all of the notes, all of the even the computer programs that are used themselves are subject to public review. That's quite different than what we have now, where all this happens behind closed doors,
Right.
in the dark, by some party that is bent on making sure the maps are in their favor.
Tell me, Eileen, why did voters, not politicians, choose to make these changes with a constitutional amendment? Would there be another way?
The reason it's an amendment is the best choice. Politicians cannot maneuver an amendment.
That's right.
The state of Ohio has some very good gerrymandering laws on the books, but 10 years from now, I'm just wondering what's going to happen to them. I would have never signed up for this if it was a law. Politicians can't maneuver it.
That's right. It's fixed.
So, not fixed.
That's the wrong word.
You mentioned the Commission of Citizens. How will the members on this commission be selected?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, as I mentioned, there are 13 voting Michiganders on that commission, and the whole process is presided over by the Secretary of State, because that is really the purview of the elections. Initially, there will be 10,000 applications sent out to a randomized number of 10,000 Michiganders, okay? And that is randomized. There are computer algorithms that can make sure that it's fair and there's no particular bias there. And then also, not only will they be receiving the 10,000 applications, but any Michigander who is interested in serving on that commission can also put in their application. Now, I should tell you that the only people that really can't be part of this are politicians, family members of politicians, lobbyists, anybody that's vested in having one party favored over another. Those people are simply cut off that, and that's really what makes it fair. Now, after the 10,000 applications plus whatever comes in from the rest of the state is assembled, it gets sorted to make sure that it's that what results from it are 200 applications that have been vetted for being of a certain party or being from a certain district and so forth. So you have a fair representation of the state. Okay. Of these 200, the minority and the majority leaders of the legislature have a chance to remove 5 of the applications for whatever reason they want to. They can pull it out. They have a right to remove 5 each, so that's 10 out of that 200. And then at that point, the 190 are put back into this algorithm that gives a randomized result, and 13 people effectively spill out of that, and they become the new commission.
Okay. So you mentioned that some people are disqualified from the selection process. Can you describe, Eileen, just one more time, the list of people that might not be able to serve?
It would be people who probably have a partisan interest. Therefore, it would be current people who have been on the legislature or elected public offices for the last 6 years. It is not barred from forever. 50 years ago, you were a mayor. But what is happening is 6-year distance means they probably have not had the political influence at that for 6 years.
I see.
So they and their family members, sometimes politicians put family members on things. And
Go figure.
the public meetings asking the public what they wanted as safeguards, that was one of them. The people barred from being on this as a safeguard to keep their
Special interests.
keep special
away.
interests. Lobbyists are not allowed on this, especially registered ones. You know, there are certain criterias more minute than that. But basically, most Michiganders who are registered voters could ask the Secretary of State for an application. And the other part of them that's really interesting is that 10,000 invitations will be sent out randomly to make sure the state of Michigan has been covered to give invitations to all areas. I thought it was a very clever idea to keep it from someone putting their hands on it and picking
That's right.
who's on the commission.
So you think, Peter, that your feeling is ordinary citizens are well qualified to do this, right?
I think they're better qualified than the politicians that are doing it now, because actually they do represent, in this process here, they do represent a fair cut through Michigan, not in terms of who is in power or who's running the show or who's donating the most money. It's just your average Jill and Joe Michigander in there doing the best they can to do a fair job. And that I think is probably the best qualification I can think of. They don't have the same conflicts of interest that a politician or lobbyist might have. And they're basically, they're in the public all the time. They're not behind closed doors. There's no secret sessions. It's all a matter of review to the public. Any of the materials that are used for that, for the decision-making purpose, are available to the public to review. You can spot a cheater a mile away that way.
So in that way, the commission would make unbiased maps?
That's the intention. That's one of the crucial aspects that rules how the decisions are made.
Okay.
Is they can't be biased toward one or the other.
So if you're a citizen who is not selected to be on the commission, what role do you have? What can you do?
Well, there's plenty of participation. I mean, as I mentioned, there are these meetings that will happen in public. The commission goes out into the state and actually convenes different meetings to review the process and also take information in from the citizens on how they'd like to be represented in the government, namely, how the districts will be defined. Municipalities tend to likely be, grouped together. Cities might be grouped together. Agricultural and rural communities will have different values and bring them together as well. So the average citizen has a lot to play in this. There are 10 meetings up front before the lines are drawn, 5 meetings afterwards, and then there's plenty of time to add information to the process.
Okay. I think we mentioned communities of interest, Eileen. Can you explain what those are and what changes will occur, do you think?
Communities of interest is a complex thing. I think we have a graphic showing one of District 5 in Michigan. What it is certain communities, under the current way that the lines are drawn, like a school district, might be split in half, and 2 different legislators in those districts. So the school district is not getting full representation from a representative.
I see.
And an example of it is one of the lines drawn currently starts in Flint and ends in Tawas in the north. So that district will have 1 legislator to represent all of those people. If you live in Tawas and your legislator is from Flint, the Flint legislator may know nothing about Great Lakes, where Tawas is, tourist business, or small communities. And if you live in Flint and your legislator is from Tawas, they may care less about the Flint water crisis or urban issues. So Tawas is a separate community interest that is uniquely theirs and should be represented by a legislator who will address that. And in Flint, with urban issues, the water problem, they should, in that area, have their own legislator. Now, all districts have to be drawn with equal population, so it's not going to look up and down like that. It might be more rectangular to represent people.
So it would be like an area that might be rural people, and another one is the urban people that have a different interest.
There's several other communities of interest in the school districts, of course. Better education if you had 1 legislator in that district. Another area of interest is farming. This is Michigan. Another is manufacturing. The people who live up in Kalkaska are not as concerned with manufacturing as the General Motors and Ford employees are.
Sure. So the commission has the opportunity to change these maps as well? Is that what you're saying?
With the 33 town hall meetings and the 33 days, the public has spoken. We want our community represented, so they created the idea of communities of interest. And so this is a public demand. And after the lines are initially drawn, there will be more meetings, as Peter said. And at those meetings, it should be pretty lively, telling the commission, here's our community of interest. Your lines don't reflect that. So again, this puts the voters in charge and not the politicians.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. So what ensures the Commission of Citizens that they will act in a nonpartisan manner?
Well, I guess that the most important thing is that we have this commission made up of the representative parties, and there's actually a predominance of people that are not affiliated with any party. There is a built-in fairness to that. The way in which a set of boundaries or districts would be defined would be approved by a majority of that group. So it will be fair and open to the public as well. I think the transparency is probably the most important part. Another thing is that we have 13 people that have been selected from over 10,000 people. And through a process of randomization and so forth, it's hard to get one particular viewpoint across or to game the system that way. So there is that. There are also strict guidelines on the fairness of the districts. And finally, there is the possibility of the majority and minority leaders of the legislature to strike those people that they feel are not going to fit in or don't work within that commission.
But is there a way that how do they safeguard against someone who misrepresents themselves as nonpartisan, but they actually are not trying to game the system?
Right. It's when the applications are received, you have to swear that you are part of a particular party or a particular interest.
So there's an oath involved.
There is an oath involved in that. Yeah, and there is also as I say, the randomization effect will filter out a lot of people just the way in which it works, and to get a fair representation. And there are the strikes. Make sure that the people that are really biased are taken out early. But I think, as I mentioned before, one of the most important things is that it is a transparent system. Okay. So it's always up to review, and people can actually spot someone that's trying to game the system.
How long do commissioners serve then on the commission?
They would serve, we're thinking about 1 to 2 years. They serve from the time that the census is received and issued to the state to a point where all of the necessary judicial reviews have been finished. And we're figuring right now that will be 1 to 2 years, because that includes not only sussing out what needs to be done, getting the consultants that will help out with the drawing of the districts and the demographics, but also the various reviews that have to be done. There's 10 up front and then 10 after the lines are drawn. So there's a period there that we figure about a year to 2 years.
So if this proposal passes in November, what is the timeline for this to be a constitutional amendment?
Okay, it becomes a constitutional amendment officially 45 days after the election. If everything goes as we hope, by December 14th, we'll have a constitutional amendment that is in place. Now, it won't really effectively be it won't be put into application until after the 2020 census, which is the next national census that we have. And so it will probably not actually be effective in an election until 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it won't really be affecting our 2020 elections?
No,
okay.
no. I wouldn't anticipate that.
Okay. Eileen, what is the role of Secretary of State through all of this? Because right now they are involved in the redistricting, right?
The Secretary of State has involved in our current redistricting as such. It is the legislators who are drawing those lines, getting them done, and it's the governor who signs off on it currently. Okay. But the Secretary of State with this amendment has a purely administrative position, which means she will accept applicants, and
Or
she
he.
will send out the she will send out the 10,000 random. That is
Okay.
the job
All
of the
right.
Secretary of State.
So then the role that the legislative and executive branch have had will change, then I assume.
It will be gone.
That would be a wonderful world.
And there's one thing that's very important to it. I love all the safeguards put into this. And one of them is that the legislators and the governor cannot take the funds away from this commission. And they also cannot shift those funds over to another department. And the governor cannot veto this, which the governor can do now.
That's right.
And so what we mentioned the executive and legislative, but what about the judiciary branch, the courts? What role will they play?
Because it's a constitutional amendment, the judiciary is only allowed to review the lines, and the only way things can be changed is if the lines are drawn that violates the Voting Rights Act, or if it violates that they've split up a district into two areas that are not touching each other. And the last way that they can do this is if they have not had an equal number of populations in each district. And they can interpret it and tell them to fix how they've broken their own constitutional law.
Fair enough.
Why couldn't the courts just have stopped gerrymandering?
There's a lot of reasons. There are so many court cases who are coming about. That is how other states are trying to fix this. And the courts are kind of all over the map with this, but they are to interpret laws, not make laws. There are some states where the courts are drawing the maps because they keep sending it back and it's inaccurate or biased. The state of Michigan will not have to go through that process.
So do other states have commissions of citizens?
4 of them do, which has been a great template for us to learn from. There's Arizona, California, Utah, and the state of Washington. And there are 2 other states that have commissions, but it's not going to be the same as ours because their population is so small. In Alaska and Montana, they only have 1 legislator that goes to the House of Representatives in Washington. So it's 1 district, it's the state.
It is the state.
Interesting. So there is precedent and there is evidence that
Yes.
a commission of citizens does work. But how much is it going to cost?
Interestingly, what we have now in the lines that were drawn in 2010, there's no accountability, no transparency. We don't have a way to know, you and I, the public, have no way to know how much they spent. But it's been designated how much will be spent on this new commission, who they expect to be in place for 2 years. It costs 11 cents per Michigander per year to do this. So it's the cost of a pop can deposit.
Right.
I'm willing to pay that to get our districts fixed.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, there's one more thing to that. If the commission, by the way, it is easy to draw fair lines, very difficult to draw the ones you saw on there. So the commission could be well done before the 2 years. As soon as the commission is done, it will be audited for its expenditures. Any surplus money goes back to the state of Michigan. So this may be more cost effective than we have,
Right. Right.
but we don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we've talked about the problem and the solution. So what can citizens do to help voters, not politicians, pass Proposal 2?
Well, it's all up to the citizens. It's all up to the voters, really. What I'd recommend is, first of all, get yourself to a poll. And you can vote for or against anything you want, but just get there and find yourself represented. A lot of people just don't even bother. And I think this anti-gerrymandering effort is really to get people to realize that they have a stake in it and their vote does count. So go there, vote for proposition number 2. and vote yes for that, okay? Don't get confused by any language. It's yes for Proposition 2. Also, find out more about gerrymandering in Michigan. See, you can check up the facts that we've been conveying here, and I think that it might interest the viewer to know more about that. Also, get involved with our promotion of this Proposition 2. Voters Not Politicians is a site that's easy to get to. There are all sorts of ways you can help. You can volunteer. You can participate in public events, bring a friend to those. You can also chip in, because right now what we're concerned about is that there's going to be a lot of opposition, big money that's going to come in and try to thwart this. I mean, we already see the forces lining up against us. We really need help to make this work.
Okay. So the contact information will be on your screen, votersnotpoliticians.com. Go there to the website and you can see how you can vote, you can volunteer, you can chip in, or just learn more about the proposal itself. And I want to thank you very much for being here and sharing all this information about Proposal 2.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, I'm proud to be a Michigander where the public has risen, their voice has been heard, and now it's up to the voter on Prop 2 to vote yes.
And it's something that's going to affect all of us.
Yes.
So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us. And no matter what your party or affiliation, please vote on November 6th. Thank you, and have a great day.